Hey y'all, I'm Mandy.
I'm Carrie, and this is Monstrous. Episode 1. You ready?
Ready?
All right. Well, this case took me down a deep and very dark rabbit hole. I spent weeks researching and writing this episode. Because once I got into all the research I found, I couldn't not put everything in.
Oh wow.
If you or anyone else wants to research it, I highly suggest it. There are a ton of books about this case, and a lot of them are available on Kindle. That's where I read the two that I used as two of my sources. So I had heard this case mentioned, but just in passing. I never really knew anything about it. And once I dove into it, I found myself in a very large mixture of emotions all over the map. This case is going to enrage you and probably all of our listeners. I'm going to tell you about one of Oklahoma's greatest tragedies in history. This is the Tulsa Race Massacre of 1921. For most of you, if not all, hearing the details of the Tulsa Massacre that took place on May 31st to June 1st of 1921 is going to sound almost impossible. Not only is it one of Oklahoma's worst tragedies in the state's history, but it's also the number one America's worst incident of racial violence. For those that know this part of history that was hidden away, the name is a bit of a contention. Some refer to it as a race riot, some call it a race war, while others call it a massacre. For definition purposes, I will be referring to it as the Tulsa Race Massacre, because in my opinion, that's exactly what it was.
Wow.
No matter what you decide to refer to it as, at the end of it all, when the events of these 18 hours were done, the African American community of Tulsa was turned into nothing more than a wasteland. I want to let everyone know that is listening up front now that there are some words and references in the case that are not the best, but due to the time in which the events took place, they are present. I have done my best to change these into more appropriate words and terms. So I want to just let everyone know that neither myself or you agree with or condone any of the terms, but because of the era, I can't change everything.
Right.
So before going any farther, please be aware of this. Hearing the horrifying details of the Tulsa Race Massacre, for those that do not know anything or little about it, will think that it has to be something out of a nightmarish novel or movie, one in which human beings lose all shred of humanity or dignity that they may have had, and commit a number of despicable acts of violence upon other humans. To which I'm here to tell you that every part of these horrific 18 hours are very much sadly true.
Wow.
So, for everyone except for you, listener discretion is deeply advised on this episode. So I used several sources in my research. Most of my information came from two books. The Nation Must Awake by Mary E. Parrish, who survived the massacre with her young daughter after running through the streets under a hail of gunfire to get to safety, and The Tulsa Race Massacre of 1921, The History of Black Wall Street and its destruction in America's worst and most controversial racial riot by world-changing history. I highly recommend both books because they're both full of information. Mary Parrish's book specifically, I think, is the best because it has her first-hand account of what took place as well as the accounts of others she interviewed. So I want to start with saying that this isn't your typical true crime case or a common go-to. From what I could find, there aren't any podcasts that have covered this case.
Oh wow.
But you and I wanted our podcast to be different.
Right.
We wanted to cover the cases other podcasts haven't done and that had received little coverage. And I believe this case fits the bill to a T. I wanted to do this for the same reasons that Mary Parrish wrote her book. And to explain why, I want to use her words. Quote, that it will serve to open the eyes of the thinking people of America to the impending danger of letting such conditions exist and remain within the land of the free and home of the brave, and to pay tribute to the martyrs of the Tulsa disaster and massacre. So, to start in Tulsa, it was originated in 1836 as a settlement of Creek Indians. White settlement began in 1882 after the arrival of the St. Louis-San Francisco Railway. The discovery of oil in Red Fork and Glenpool launched the oil and gas boom, naming Tulsa as the oil capital of the world, and Tulsa grew from there. Before 1905, African Americans had acquired the land that had later become Greenwood. They acquired this land from the Creek Indians, because what a lot of people don't know is African Americans were also slaves to Indians.
Oh, wow.
Yep. But
And
Indians treated their slaves as equals. They were seen more as like the maids and things like that of today.
Oh,
Yep. So the Creek Indians left their land to their servants when, they settled elsewhere. This land became Greenwood. The Greenwood district of Tulsa was a thriving community at the time of the massacre. By the time 1921 rolled around, Tulsa had a population of 100,000 people, with most of Tulsa's African American residents, 10,000 total, living inside Greenwood. It was a vibrant area with churches, newspapers, a movie theater, a library, and a ton of other Black-owned businesses. The thriving, vibrant area continued to grow, and this led to the development of the Dunbar Grade School, Booker T. Washington High School, dance halls, stores, law offices, and many more businesses, as well as homes. It was a well-groomed, well-affluent, and cared-for part of Tulsa, something the residents were proud of, something they built on their own. All of this inspired the name of the Greenwood District, which is still highly used today. It is best known as Black Wall Street. The Black Wall Street was referred to as a city within a city. The members of the community had no reason to go anywhere for any of their needs. Segregation during this time was highly enforced, and oftentimes the punishment was the hanging of whoever broke this, quote, law. So even with these, quote, laws in place, the residents of Greenwood really had no need to go anywhere else. They had everything they need, and they thrived in their own little city. The Greenwood Tulsans made decent money. They had large homes and nice things, something that during the Jim Crow era did not happen for people of color often or easily. Sounds like a slice of heaven right there on earth, right?
yeah.
Well, despite the pretty outside and fullness of Black Wall Street, it was in fact not heaven at all, not even close. The crime rates were high, and Tulsa was full of vigilantism. And it grew worse in 1920 after a white mob hanged a white teenage boy accused of murder. Newspaper reports from this stated that the Tulsa police did very little to protect him from the mob outside the courthouse, and did even less when the mob took this teenage boy from his cell. During this time, as Mary Parrish said in her book, quote, lynching was considered a Southern pastime. The largest number of hangings occurred between 1889 and 1918, with 78% being Black persons. And those were not private, quiet happenings either. They often included crowds, manipulations, and humiliation. The year in which the Tulsa Massacre took place, as many as 59 Black men were hanged. And despite the lower number of these events, the brutality had increased. Reasons like this one are why the residents of Greenwood were wary of white men and women. And honestly, they had good reason to be, along with every reason to believe the young boy who is pointed as the reason the events of May 31st, 1921 took place was not safe, and it was up to them to protect it. The white residents of Tulsa resented the residents of Greenwood because of the opulent lifestyles they led. They believed the people of Greenwood were inferior and unworthy of the luxuries in which they afforded themselves. The people of Greenwood had big homes, fancy clothes, and great restaurants in their neighborhood. And instead of bettering themselves, they decided to hate the people that were doing better than they were. Does that sound familiar?
Yeah. Yeah.
So during the years that Greenwood was thriving, so was anti-Black sentiments, including the KKK. Due to the Jim Crow laws, which lasted for almost 100 years, these views were more than boosted with the release of the movie The Birth of a Nation. It gave the KKK a platform for being heroes instead of villains. So, in other words, the movie, Jim Crow laws, and growing anti-Black sentiments, all of these people are everywhere pent up and ready to lash out at a moment's notice. And the events that took place in Tulsa were bound to happen at some point. In 1919, things began to escalate all over the nation. The summer of this year is referred to as the Red Summer of 1919, due to the number of riots and massacres motivated by hate and jealousy of Black people. During these times, the people of Greenwood, even inside their small slice of heaven, feared the rise of racial violence and the attacks against them. And their fears came true, exploding into even more than they had feared in May of 1921. In Mary Parrish's book, she recants her account of these events and about Tulsa. She stated, quote, "After spending years of struggling and sacrifice, the people had begun to look upon Tulsa as the Negro metropolis of the Southwest. Then the devastating Tulsa disaster burst upon us, blowing to atoms ideas and ideals no less than mere material evidence of our civilization." This lady had a way with words, let me tell you.
Really?
Yes, you'll have to read her book. It's so good. In less than 24 hours, the Greenwood district was left to nothing more than a wasteland, leaving nearly every resident homeless, there 1 minute and gone the next, were homes of nearly 10,000 people, nearly every business located along Greenwood Avenue, and up to 300 people dead.
Oh, wow.
The events of 1921 have become known through testimony from survivors and witnesses, because the government did everything they could to hide these events and very few discussed it. It was discussed so little that when a reporter interviewed the district attorney for Tulsa County in 1996, he stated, quote, "I was born and raised here, and I'd never heard of the riot."
What? Are you
Yeah.
kidding me?
Nope. I am being dead serious.
What the hell?
I told you this one it's awful.
That's sad.
So, 103 years after these events, it's time it comes to light, because I'm sure many of us by the end of this will fear this will happen again if we as a nation do not learn from our past mistakes. So, everyone, if you can sit down and hold your breath, because the story of these events are going to shock and enrage many. The events of the morning of May 30th, 1921 are conflicting. The names of both protagonists aren't even confirmed. All that is confirmed is the events that followed. A young man named Dick Rowland, who was 19 years old, an African American shoe shiner, entered the elevator in the Drexel building, where a 17-year-old Sarah Page, a white teenage girl, was the operator. In one version of events, Rowland tried to attack Sarah, to which she screamed. In another, they were lovers and had an argument. And the last, which is most likely to be true, was that Rowland had accidentally stepped on Sarah's foot when he lost his balance, and she screamed. In any version, it drew attention to them. Rowland took off running from the building, and rumors circulated from there. Rowland was arrested for SAing Sarah the next day.
Oh my God.
Yeah, without any proof that it ever happened. So they arrested him the next day, and by the time news hit the entirety of Tulsa, there were newspaper articles and talk of a hanging to happen that night. There were even reports that the Tulsa police commissioner received threats regarding Dick's life. Concerned for his safety, the commissioner ordered Dick be moved to the top of the courthouse, where he was to be put under the protection of 6 deputies and Sheriff W.N. McCollin. Might be McCogg. I might be saying it wrong, so everyone knows. Might be pronouncing that name wrong. But to this day, there are no written testimonies from Sarah herself. And several of my sources say that she didn't even press the charges on Rowland.
Oh, wow.
The terror that ensued following this is said to have been possibly planned, and the event between Page and Rowland just kind of laid the groundwork to excuse the behavior. Alicia Scott, who was one of the attorneys for the surviving victims of the massacre, examined newspapers from 1921 and was able to obtain a confession from a Tulsa policeman, Van B. Hurley, who claimed that the massacre did not come from anger. It was not random or spontaneous. He stated it was, in fact, planned, and that the police captain, George G. Blaine, was actually one of the conspirators. No matter your view on this event, it seems that the horrific crimes of this grueling 18 hours was going to happen no matter what. The perpetrators of these crimes wanted to get their hands on Greenwood, and they would stop at nothing to get it. By 7:30 p.m. on May 31st, hundreds of white men and women had gathered in front of the county courthouse demanding that Dick be handed over to them. Around 9 p.m., word had reached Greenwood that this was happening, and so Black Tulsans had every reason to believe that the rumors of Dick Rowland being hung were true, and that it would happen if they stood by and did nothing to protect him. So, around 25 black men, many who were World War I veterans, made their way to the courthouse. They offered to help the sheriff protect Rowland, but the sheriff declined, and the men returned back to Greenwood. Following this, a group of white men tried to break into a nearby National Guard armory, to which, thankfully, they were unsuccessful. This led to a rumor. Could not find this rumor anywhere, but it led to another rumor. And when this rumor reached Greenwood, about 10 p.m., a second group of men, about 75 this time, returned to the courthouse. And this time, a few of them were armed and ready to protect an innocent young man. But again, they were denied. The second time they went up to assist the sheriff, there were about 1,500 white men, and many of them were armed.
Oh, wow.
As the group of black men tried to leave, a white man attempted to disarm one of the black World War I veterans, and a stray shot was fired. From there, all hell broke loose. Over the next 6 hours, Greenwood was plunged into a state of chaos, rage, fear, and unrest. Fighting exploded along the Frisco tracks where the black community tried to hold off those of the white mob. Armed white men began taking part in drive-by shootings in the mostly black neighborhoods. At the same time as this was happening, an unarmed black man sitting inside the movie theater that sat just downtown was shot and killed.
God.
According to okhistory.org, the white mob were, quote, like mad bulls after a red flag, or bloodthirsty wolves after a carcass. So did these human wolves called men rave to destroy their fellow citizens. Quote.
That's insane.
And it just gets worse. Despite the fact that they were hugely outnumbered, Black Tulsans fought hard to protect their homes, their businesses, and their community. But in the end, their numbers just simply did not amount to that of the white community. They were outnumbered and had a shortage of ammunition, forcing them to have to retreat to their homes for safety. Immediately, the white mob advanced and fell upon Greenwood, burning and looting everything along the way. At about 1:30 in the morning, the shooting had stopped, and it seemed that the worst of it was over until someone seen the flames. The mob was advancing farther and farther into Greenwood quickly. According to Mary Parrish's book, the black men stood like Stonewall Jackson, like a stone wall in an attempt to protect Greenwood. She stated the burning continued for a long time, and by about 3 or 4 in the morning, the Midway Hotel was burning. Parrish's friend had called for the fire department, who said they would be right out, to which they failed to show up. It is said in the book by World Changing History that the fire department not showing up was due to many of the men from the white mob blocking the fire truck's way and even threatening them. To which their fire chief told them, turn around and come back. Mary went on to say that around 5 in the morning, her friend had called the police. You want to know what the police said?
What?
That they would be there around 7 a.m.
Oh, wow. What the hell?
Yep, this comes from police reports and the National Guard. That both entities were busy protecting white homes from a non-existent attack from Black Tulsa, who they also began to arrest at this point. At this eruption of violence, city officials had selected men, white men, and deputized them. Many of these men were participants in the violence that was ensuing. This, of course, did nothing but give these men a sense of pure freedom, and it made the violence worse. It was even reported that some of the National Guard had taken place in the violence themselves. No authoritative figure in any way did anything to try to end the violence that was taking place. And in fact, an eyewitness stated that a Tulsa police officer had actually told members of the mob to, and this is a trigger warning, quote, get a gun and get an N-word.
Are you fucking serious?
Dead serious. That was reported, and I've seen that in several sources.
Wow.
Yeah. So, shortly before dawn on June 1st, thousands of armed white men stood right outside the Greenwood district. When daybreak hit, they poured into the streets of Black Wall Street. Upon entering, people stole, damaged, and destroyed the property of the Greenwood residents. They deliberately burnt homes, businesses, and virtually any structure that stood. And they didn't just set them on fire, they burnt them to the ground. All while no official tried in any way to stop them. A number of outrageous actions were committed during these few hours. Not only did they loot and burn homes and businesses, but they committed countless murders, including that of A.C. Jackson, a black surgeon who had surrendered to the white mob. Mary Parrish stated in her book she prayed for daylight in hopes that it would end, but she was wrong. Looking out her window, she seen carloads of men unloading on First Street, and shortly after, she heard what she described as a buzzing sound. Her and her friend ran to the door to see what was going on, and she describes her heart going still upon looking out. She said, quote, "There was a dark shadow, and upon a second look, we discerned that this cloud was caused by a fast approaching aeroplanes. It dawned upon us that the enemy had organized in the night and was invading our district the same as the Germans invaded France and Belgium. The firing of guns were renowned in quick succession. People were seen to flee from their burning homes, some with babe in their arms and leading crying and excited children by the hand. Others, old and feeble, all fleeing to safety. Upon arrival of these airplanes and machine guns, which were placed on top of buildings, the residents of Greenwood were left with nothing else but to flee for safety or try to fight off the violent mob that continued to grow and wreak havoc, and hope that in the end they remained alive."
I couldn't imagine to live through that.
This one was rough. So after 18 hours of pure hell and torment, additional National Guard troops finally arrived in Tulsa around 9:15 in the morning on June 1st. But at this point, most of Greenwood had already been torched to the ground. By the time these troops finally decided to show up and the mayor decided it was time to declare martial law shortly before noon on June 1st, the events of those 18 hours had pretty much come to an end on their own. Before those in power did anything to stop it, thousands of white residents had looted and burned homes and businesses, as well as killed countless black Tulsans, and demolished nearly 35 city blocks.
Wow.
Which I have photos that I'm going to put on our Facebook page of this district before and after. And then I also have so it's multiple snapshots that were taken from the air that were pieced together to show the entire district as one following everything that took place. It's awful. The smoke, you could see the smoke from reports days following the massacre. It was so bad. So the Red Cross reported more than 800 people injured for injuries, and the death toll began at 36, which is still to this day the official recording listed with the Oklahoma Bureau of Vital Statistics. But the Red Cross reported that they believed there's actually a death toll of around 300 dead. A number that I'm not sure will ever be able to be confirmed because, quote, "hurriedly rushed to burial." That quote came from the Red Cross themselves.
Oh.
The uncertain number of deaths from this is due to the mass cover-up that has continued on for the last century. In 2000, there was weighted evidence found that pointed to at least 3 mass graves left from the massacre. The amount of damage that was left behind reached an easy $4 million. Would you like to know what $4 million would equal to today?
Yeah.
You want to try to take a guess?
No, it's got to be unbelievable. Unbelievable.
It would be $63,246,597 today.
Oh my God.
And to make it worse than it already is, the residents of Greenwood weren't even treated correctly by the hospitals. 8 of the confirmed deaths were taken to the hospital, and each victim was treated inside the basement of Morningside Hospital due to segregation, of course, and the Greenwood Hospital being burnt to the ground.
Wow.
It kind of leaves you lost for words.
Yeah. It's unbelievable.
The Red Cross played a crucial role in the care of those injured and placed into the hospital, along with those that were found on the streets. The Red Cross, I think, in this story does a lot more for the residents of Greenwood than the government of Oklahoma still has yet to do. The Red Cross reported there were at least 8 miscarriages due to the massacre.
Oh my God. It's sad.
And those, of course, are not counted in the death toll. So even after all the damage and havoc that was released upon the Greenwood District community, they still didn't give up. They had survived one of the deadliest race massacres in history, and yet they continued to fight and push forward. Despite the fact that any restorations to be done were left to the members of this community, they refused to hand it over, and they rebuilt their district from the ground up. Relief efforts were sent out by the Red Cross, churches, and other philanthropies, but the city of Tulsa did nothing to help. Instead, the white establishment tried to force relocation upon the Greenwood residents, but within days of the massacre, they began to rebuild Greenwood, with many residents, thousands to be exact, being forced to spend the winters of 1921 and 1922 sleeping outside in tents.
Dang.
Weeks after the Greenwood district was burnt to the ground, the Tulsa government presented plans to turn Greenwood from a community district into an industrial district. This plan failed because the residents of Greenwood refused to sell their land.
Good.
And although Tulsa was rebuilt, it has never been the same since 1921. The first grocery store since was not built until the 1940s. And since then, only one more has been added. And there still remains no hospital within this district, since the last one was burnt to the ground on the morning of June 1st, 1921.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that surprised me. I couldn't believe that they had never rebuilt it.
Right.
And even still to today, in 2024, Tulsa still remains deeply segregated. The population of
Really?
The population of North Tulsa, where Greenwood is actually located, is 11% lower than that of South Tulsa. And from what I could find, North Tulsa is still mostly an African American community. From what I could find. That very well could be wrong. I don't live there.
Right.
So within hours of the massacre coming to an end, all charges against Dick Rowland were dropped. The charges that it started this entire thing, or so they say, just hours after it ended, were dropped. Police made a statement, and they stated they believed that Rowland had simply stumbled into Page. Like, you didn't figure that out before you decided to arrest him for SAing a 17-year-old girl?
Right.
Before you decided to stand by and not do anything when an entire mob of white people decided to attack a black community and kill hundreds of people. I feel like maybe you should have figured that out before that happened.
You would think so. Ignorant.
Yeah, just pure ignorance and anger and hatred because this community was doing so much better than they were. Well, how about you get off your asses and do something about it?
Stupidity.
Stop blaming other people for your shitty life. It's your own fault you live in the situation you live in.
Right.
In most cases. Not all cases, of course.
Right.
So, despite the charges being dropped and Rowling being found to have done nothing wrong, not a single one of the criminal acts that took place on either May 31st or June 1st of 1921 was ever prosecuted or punished in any way.
Unbelievable.
Oh, that made me so mad. To see or to read that they figured out after all of this that he done nothing wrong. I mean, he didn't do anything that even if he would have done what they said he did, it still didn't constitute or give them a right to do the things that they did.
Right.
But to them to then say, oh, he didn't do anything wrong, and then you don't hold anyone that did any of these acts responsible.
Yeah, nobody's held accountable at all.
It's just awful.
It's unbelievable.
It made me so mad when I read that. And I read that in more than one source. So this cover up was allowed to happen. And for a century, very few people have heard of the Tulsa Race Massacre, and even fewer talk about it. The Tulsa Tribune removed their front page stories that sparked the events of May 31st. Police and state militia archives about the massacre have gone missing as well. There was a brief investigation done into the massacre shortly after, but those records have also disappeared.
Wow.
So just a complete cover-up effort. Like, we're ashamed of what we did, so let's just get rid of it and act like it never happened.
Mm-hmm.
It took an entire year for anyone to really discuss the events of those 18 hours. This happened when Mary Parrish published her book about the events.
Oh, shit.
So the book that I read, the one that you can find on Kindle, it was republished this last year by her daughter. But Mary herself had originally individually published it, and there were only about 20 original copies made.
Oh.
Her daughter found it as an adult, and she republished it. So now it's out there for everyone.
Nice.
As I said before, in this book, she recounts her own experience and the experience as others. And following the book release, nothing came until 75 years later, when the first memorial for all victims were placed outside the Mount Zion Baptist Church, and then another outside the Greenwood Cultural Center. So 75 years for anyone, even inside Tulsa, to acknowledge this took place.
That's unbelievable. That's sad.
It's mind-boggling. Like 75
Disgusting.
years? It's outrageous.
Mm-hmm.
Then, in 1997, a commission was formed to investigate what had actually happened. This report had recommended that their surviving victims be paid for their pain, suffering, and their losses. That's the least they could do. Something that the city of Tulsa never followed through on.
Wow, really?
Yep.
What kind of shit is that?
Never followed through on any, even to this day, never followed through.
Wow.
Several lawsuits have since followed, even a lawsuit within the last decade. But again, nothing has ever come from any of them. In March of 2001, it's believed this was a reaction to the commission's report. Bipartisan state leaders approved for each of the 118 known survivors to be awarded a fucking gold-plated medal with a state seal on it. Like, oh, we're sorry for what we allowed to happen to your families. So here's a gold-plated medal with the Oklahoma State seal. Like, why do you think that's going to make anything better?
Right. That's like a slap in the face.
Yeah. Like, oh, well, here, this will get you to shut up about it. Well, what?
The biggest slap in the damn face.
It doesn't do anything. The youngest of the survivors at the time that this was done, she was 85. Well, I say she, but I'm not sure if it was a boy or a girl. Was 85 years old. That
Wow.
means the youngest survivor was 5 years old when this massacre happened.
God.
And all you're going to give them is a fucking gold-plated medal?
For lifelong trauma.
What kind of sense does that make?
That's our world today.
It's awful. In April 2001, the Tulsa Reparations Coalition was formed in order to obtain reparations for the suffering and the atrocities that the Tulsa Black community had endured. But this was not taken on by the Oklahoma government. It was instead sponsored by the Center for Racial Justice, Inc. The governor had failed to sign an act into place that would have brought restitution to the families affected by the Tulsa Race Massacre. Of course, because, why would the governor sign that? Then he would have to acknowledge that it happened.
Mm-hmm.
However, though, after he failed to do this, The 1921 Tulsa Race Riot Reconciliation Act provided for over 300 college scholarships for the descendants of the Greenwood Massacre, as well as provided for economic development within the district.
Good.
It's definitely not what they deserve. They should definitely have done and be doing more, but I guess it's better than nothing in a way.
Right. I
I'm
agree.
kind of on the fence on how I feel about this is all you're doing about it. In 2002, there was a religious group that raised $28,000 to which they gave to the surviving victims. But the total that each got was nowhere near what they deserved. The 140 surviving victims in 2002 that had come forward and that were known were given about $200 each from this group.
Wow.
This group had funded this money through private donations. So it sounds like a lot. $28,000, that's a good chunk of money. But then you break it up
Right.
and it's not very much at all. It's definitely not anywhere near what they deserve. The last remaining survivors, who were aged at the time 107, 106, and 100 years old, testified.
Wow.
Yeah, so they've lived with this trauma for over 100 years and they've done nothing for them. They testified before the U.S. House Subcommittee on the Constitution, Civil Rights, and Civil Liberties in 2021. And as far as I know, once again, nothing came from them testifying.
Unbelievable.
Yeah. There may be something in the works that came from their testimony. I just couldn't find anything that said they did anything about it. In 2010, the John Hope Franklin Reconciliation Park was opened in the Greenwood District as a way to memorialize the events of May 31st, 1921. In 2015, the 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre Centennial Commission was founded, and in 2021, Greenwood Rising was established. It took decades for any acknowledgement of the massacre to happen, and still to this day, so few people know the full length of carnage, destruction, and havoc that was rained down upon the people of Greenwood. This part of America's history is not taught in schools and barely mentioned in history books, which it was not mentioned at all in history books until the late 1990s.
That's unbelievable.
And sadly, the only reason it seems that the massacre is even coming to light once again, because it seems to have these periods where it comes up and then just vanishes, is all due to the recent pop culture and movies like Watchmen, Love Country, and the Purge series.
Oh, wow.
Because all of those bits and pieces that fit with this massacre or are loosely based on them. So it's starting to come to light once again, just like it has in the past, and then it just vanishes. So, as I mentioned before, the Oklahoma had formed a Tulsa Race Commission in 1997, but it was renamed in 2018 to the 1921 Race Massacre Commission. This same year, Tulsa officials dedicated a 30-foot Black Wall Street mural on one of the downtown buildings along the highway. I found a photo of it, and I'm going to post it on the Facebook page along with all the other photos. It is amazing. I don't know who did this mural, but oh my God. Here, let me send it to you really fast.
Okay.
Oh,
yeah, and then I'll look at it. Oh, wow, that's badass.
Right? I found it. I was like, oh my gosh. It is amazing.
Oh, that's cool. Oh, yeah, that was a lot of talent right there.
I don't know who did it, but it is wow.
That is amazing.
Then, since I have this pulled up, I'm going to send you that. So, this is picture of before one of the streets of Greenwood.
Oh, that's cute.
It's just a cute little town.
Yeah, that is a cute little town.
Like, and it appears to be so much bigger than it really was. It was only 35 blocks.
Oh, wow, really?
Yeah, Greenwood, that's how big Greenwood was. 35 city blocks, but it appears to be so much bigger than that.
It
In
does.
photos.
So many people out on the streets, nice cars.
Mm-hmm. And then here is, this is the big aerial view that I told you about.
Mm-hmm.
Following
Oh, wow.
the massacre.
Oh, my God. Wow.
And then this is all the smoke that could be seen. I believe it was a day or two later.
Jeez. Wow. Wow.
And then here's another view of one of the blocks. I have other ones, but I wanted to send you these ones.
Oh my God. I don't have words.
They completely burnt everything to the ground. The only building that was not torched to the ground was the Booker T. Washington High School.
Gosh.
There are some homes in the background of that photo
Yeah, I
that
see
are
that.
completely burnt. So some of the homes they set on fire. Some of them were just looted and just destroyed rather than set on fire. But
Wow.
virtually every structure was burnt to the ground.
That's insane.
As far as like business or building wise, the only one that still stood at the end was Booker T. Washington High School.
Wow.
Even the church, the Mount Zion Church,
Mm-hmm.
it was built 8 weeks before the massacre took place and it was burnt to the ground.
Oh, wow.
Yes. So all of these pictures, along with the other ones I have, I'm going to put on our Facebook page.
Yeah, so people can go look at them.
Oh, yeah. It took me a little bit to find good, because there are a lot more photos out there. But some of them are harder than that to look at.
Yeah, those are unbelievable.
So, in the same summer, so 2018, local officials had also worked to obtain a loan, which they got, that would extend the Greenwood Cultural Center, and this was completed in 2021. In 2020, the Oklahoma school districts finally underwent an extensive curriculum adjustment, which it finally introduced and included a very large portion, very large academic plan to teach students of Oklahoma the events of the Tulsa Massacre. Ooh. So, yeah, after 100 years, Oklahoma schools finally put it into their curriculum.
They did it, finally.
Ridiculous that it took that long.
I agree.
So, as I mentioned before, it was rumored that the quick removal of those that had been killed during the massacre was done so in part to cover up the whole thing. And these rumors led to the belief of there being not one, multiple mass graves. But no investigation had ever took place to either confirm or deny this. Not until the acting members of the commission that I had mentioned had spoke with survivors of the incident, gathered documents from witnesses who had already died, and accumulated as much historical evidence as they could get, because most of it was destroyed. Using these witness accounts, after hearing the rumors of the mass graves, they used ground penetrating radars, and they found one of these mass graves outside of Tulsa Cemetery. So, on October 21st of 2020, a forensic team working inside Tulsa found 11 coffins inside this mass grave while searching for victims.
11, you said?
Yes, the work to find all of the victims placed inside this one, possibly other mass graves, and to identify them was and still is a very large task. But it is a task that this team and the mayor would not give up on. More than, are you ready?
Yes.
Hold your breath.
Okay.
More than 120 graves were found during the 2020 search.
What? Oh my God.
That death toll of 36 ain't looking too good there, is it?
Not at all.
That's way off.
Right.
So this led a forensic analysis team to collect DNA from about 30 sets of remains. And to this, Mayor G.T. Bynum said, quote, "We'll continue the search until we find everybody that we can."
Oh, wow. Wow.
Now, for the brightest part of this entire story. On July 12th of 2024, so just a few weeks ago, it was announced that the remains of Lieutenant Colonel Daniel, a World War I veteran, were identified. Lieutenant Colonel Daniel was an Army vet who fought in World War I. He was in Tulsa looking for work before he returned to his hometown in Georgia. He was in his 20s when he was killed during the massacre.
Oh, he was killed during the massacre.
Yep. He was the first victim just a couple weeks ago, July 12th, that they were able to identify.
Wow.
This breakthrough came when investigators found a 1936 letter written by his mother's attorney seeking Daniel's veterans benefits. And unfortunately, I don't have a last name. I'm not sure if they know his last name or if they're just choosing to not release it. So he'll be either Daniel or Lieutenant Colonel Daniel. So this letter convinced them that Lieutenant Colonel Daniel was one of the many to die during the massacre. And so using DNA from the descendants of his brothers, they were able to positively ID him.
Oh,
About
wow.
this, Mayor Bynum said, quote, "This is one family who gets to give a member of their family that they lost a proper burial after not knowing where they were for over a century." So that gives hope that maybe as they continue the search, as descendants come forward, that maybe they will be able to give a name to all of the victims of this
Right.
massacre. With all of the ancestry testing that they have now, you can opt in to say, yes, I want my DNA to be tested against. Maybe with all of these things that we have now that they didn't have a decade or more ago, all of these victims will finally be able to get a name and have a proper burial.
Right. Hopefully.
So now I'm going to tell you how they found him. Due to the fragmentation of Daniel's remains, the cause of death couldn't be determined. Carrie Stackelbeck, an anthropologist from Oklahoma State, stated that Daniel was found inside a small, simple wooden box and that the box was too small for him. She stated, quote, "They had to bend his legs at the knee in order to get him to fit.
Oh,
His
my
head,
God.
his head and feet both touched either end of the casket."
Wow.
So it seems like to me that they built just a standard size and made people fit in them.
Right.
So, knowing how he was left, it makes you wonder and can only imagine how the rest of the hundreds of believed victims were left inside their makeshift mass graves.
Right.
So, this year, on the 103rd anniversary of the Tulsa Race Massacre, television crews didn't descend upon Greenwood, the neighborhood where as many as 300 Black people were murdered by a white mob in 1921. Thousands of protesters didn't march through the streets chanting justice for Greenwood as they did following the murder of George Floyd in May 2020. Joe Biden wasn't on hand to declare Greenwood a symbol of, quote, the American spirit, as he did on the Sentinel of the Race Massacre in 2021. Still, the events of May 31st and June 1st of 1921 remains the worst incidents of racial violence within U.S. history, and it is still hardly known about. It has only began to come to light within the last decade. News reports were squelched, and the evidence, along with government reports, were cleaned up and hidden. We do, though, at least know a little about a few of the victims, though it isn't enough to just say their names. Reuben Everett was a laborer who lived with his wife Jane in a home along Archer Street. George Walter Daggs was the manager of the Tulsa office of the Pierce Oil Company. Dr. A.C. Jackson was fatally wounded in his front yard after he surrendered to a group of whites. He was a surgeon. And as mentioned before, the newest we know about is Lieutenant Colonel Daniel, who is a World War I veteran. For each of the few victims that I just mentioned, there are about 75 others that are still unknown.
Wow.
Through the official negligence, the public idiocy, and just pure blindness, there have always been Tulsans who have tried to help make sure the massacre was never forgotten. Members of both race classes have worked alone and together to collect evidence, preserve photos, conduct interviews, and write down everything they found. None, though, have succeeded as much as Mary E. Parrish. In her book, she recanted the experience she had as well as that of others and puts into words a large lesson that came from this massacre, and one that I believe we can all still learn from today. She stated, quote, "The Tulsa disaster has taught great lessons to all of us, has dissipated some of our false creeds, and has revealed to us verities of which we were oblivious. The most significant lesson it has taught me is that the love of race is the deepest feeling rooted in our being, and that no race can rise higher than its lowest member. Some of our group who have been blessed with educational or financial advantages are oftentimes inclined to forget ourselves to the extent that they feel their superiority over those less fortunate. But when a supreme test like the Tulsa disaster comes, it serves to remind us that we all are of one race, that human fiends, like those who had full sway on June 1st, have no respect of person."
I like
Told
that.
you, this woman had a way with words.
Yes, I like that. Very well said.
Yes, and that's why I was like, she said it perfectly,
Yes.
because it was something that should have never happened. It was monstrous. I mean, I don't know
Right.
what else to call it. But I truly believe if you know the details, there is a lesson to come from it.
Right.
So, the issues within this case brings to light the concerns for police reform, the destructive urban planning policies, and reparations for all victims. And it's kind of poetic irony that the fictions of today, from books to movies that we all enjoy, seem to force America to confront its very real, very dark history. And most of us don't even realize that most of what is portrayed in these entertaining parts of our everyday lives are mostly real events that have taken place at some point in time. America's checkered past when it comes to racial relations and tensions have been met with all manner of upheaval and dark times. Even though we have made progress from the 1920s and before, and have had bright events, movements forward, and people that symbolize this progress, there have also been events and actions that still embody the dark side of America. And even today, in 2024, we still see the darkness running rampant within our country's borders. But rather than be out and in the open, it's hidden away until things explode. The Tulsa Massacre of 1921 was not the first, and as we all know, it was not the last racially driven incident of violence in our country. 2 years before the Tulsa incident, the Red Summer of 1919 took place. And following the Tulsa Massacre was the Rosewood Massacre, the multiple Harlem race riots, and most recently, the George Floyd riots of 2020 and the Portland protest shooting of 2022. These are only a few incidences of racially motivated unrest in which America's past is full of. These racially motivated acts of violence are not riots of the past, as many believe they are. They are an ongoing phenomenon of a disease that has plagued our country for centuries. Over the last decade, racial acts of aggression have been on the rise. Hate crimes have increased, and racism is the worst that I myself have ever seen. Now more than ever, we all must look to the past in order to work together as one. We can't allow the story of Greenwood, or any others like it, to fade into obscurity again. The only way to ensure this does not happen is for these stories to be talked about in the open. If the facts are not presented, discussed, and accepted as a factual part of our history, this dark past will continue to be a menace within America's own land and to its own people. which will inevitably cause the future to echo the past. Many Americans are not fond of learning our country's dark history, but knowing America's history in its entirety can help us all ensure that we do not make the same mistakes and ensure that history does not repeat itself yet again.
Well said.
And that's it.
Well said.
That is the Tulsa Race Massacre of 1921.
That was a good one.
It was a tough one.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that I can't believe that it's not talked about.
Yep, not many people know what it is. If they've heard of it, it's more of, oh, I've heard the name, but they don't actually know what it's about. A lot of people think it's about like a race, like a NASCAR race.
Right.
Most people don't
But
realize that it's like people race.
yeah.
Yep, it was pretty rough to it took me a little while to get through all the sources
Oh, I bet it did.
because it was rough. And like I said, there is more out there. I've for the most part covered everything. There are several books out there. You can get them on Kindle, Amazon. Libraries probably have some of them. I'm not 100% sure on that one. So there is a lot more information out there. Did my best to include all of what I felt were like the big parts, the parts that people really needed to know. And I kind of omitted like just a few little things that really was neither here nor there to the entire thing.
Right.
So I'm going to put all my sources in the show notes. All of the photos that I have will be on Facebook. And that's it for this week.
That was a great one. That was a good one.
It kind of leaves you speechless.
Yeah, like I can't believe more people don't know about. I didn't know anything about it.
It's one of those where it's like you're shocked by it and you can't believe people don't talk about it and it's not a normal thing to discuss, but you're also so shocked that you just truly don't even know what to say.
Right.
Especially as us being from the South
Right.
and us also being white women, it kind of puts us in a position where I can't, like, we know what the history is,
Right.
especially from our neck of the woods. We know how bad things were, because history for us is taught very differently than it is here in the Midwest. Here in the Midwest, you don't learn about your area specifically.
Right.
Whereas for us in the South, we learn the history of North Carolina. We learn the history of Virginia. We learn all of those states' history individually. So we know how bad racism and segregation were in our area at that time and even before 1921. But just to know that even though segregation was still going on, that it was that bad
Right.
still at that time is just it's just mind blowing.
Right.
And it's hard for us to speak on those experiences because that's not something we've ever had to deal with. Like, I've gotten weird looks and comments because my sister is mixed.
Right.
And because my sister's dad, I was a part of their family. And so I was the only little white girl, in our church. And many neighborhoods we lived on, I was the only little white girl in the neighborhood. So I guess I kind of had an experience, but I guess it was the other way around because it was just odd, I guess, for other people to see that.
Right.
It's always been normal for me, so
I mean, I've experienced the looks and people saying stuff because my family's mixed. Like we've
Mhm.
got different races in our family. We've got black, we've got Mexican, we've got white. Like, but I've never experienced anything like that.
Yeah, no. And
Like
that's
I
what I was
never
saying too. Like,
got.
it, people like us that have mixed families, or that have an extended family, whether it be you just kind of become part of the family or whatever, your situation is, and they're not the same color as your skin, you kind of do get an experience of, some people give you weird looks and, ask questions and things like that. But it's never have I witnessed it be to this extent, even with my younger sister, because she went to school here in the Midwest and I went to high school here in the Midwest. And she was the only little mixed girl, the only girl of color at all in her elementary school. And even for her, like, I had never really seen anything like this. Like, she wasn't excluded or anything like that. There were some people that kind of got some weird looks because, here I am, 6 years older than her, walking her home. So it
Right.
was it out of concern because there's this big white girl with this little mixed girl? Or was it because that's weird? But never
Right.
to this extent.
Yeah, I've never seen anything. Like I said, it's just been looks or people saying ignorant things. It's never been anything past that.
Which even stuff like that shouldn't happen.
No, but I mean, people are still in the old days.
It's
People are still
it's
ignorant.
ridiculous. Yeah, like, mind your business.
They're ignorant.
Nothing
Like,
I'm
you can
doing
believe
over
what you want,
here.
but
Exactly. Like, nothing I'm doing over here is affecting you in any kind of way. So you just go over there, mind your business.
exactly. Exactly. People
Uh,
are, like I said, people are ignorant.
It's so dumb. It's mind-boggling
Agree.
that this stuff still happens. Like, obviously we know this stuff still happens. Like, we're not oblivious
Right.
to it.
Right.
But it's just crazy to realize that what is happening today, all, like you said, all the riots, all the, the what's seen as, I guess, segregation on social media, where it's, there are some black girls telling white women not to braid their hair. There are some white women telling black girls, oh, well, you shouldn't have blonde hair then. Like, all
Right.
of this is the same thing that happened in the 1920s and before. It's just being done in a
Right.
different way.
Yeah.
The only
Like I,
difference is we now have the internet and social media. That's it. It's the same exact thing.
mm-hmm. What you do is what you do. It doesn't affect me or my life.
Exactly. That's how I see it. I don't care what you do. As long as it doesn't affect me, my husband, or my children, you go
Exactly.
do you.
Yep.
Live your best life, girl.
Yep. That's how I am.
Like, in the end, I don't care. Don't mess with my kids. Don't mess with my family. We'll be good. We won't have no
Yep.
problems. I don't care what you do.
Yep.
Just stay over there with all that.
That's exactly how I am.
Oh, gosh. Well, all right. I think that's it for this week, I guess. We'll be back next week with a new case, new information, new life things to share.
Right.
See what happens between now and next week. Who knows?
Yep.
All right. So I guess that's it. I want to thank everyone for hanging out with us, and we'll be back next week.
Remember to watch for monsters.
And don't kill people. Bye, y'all.
Bye, y'all. Please be sure to rate and review so we can make sure we give y'all a podcast you love. Be sure to subscribe so you get notifications each week when episodes air.
If you want to send us a case or a topic suggestion, you can email us at monstroustcpod@gmail.com.
Also, be sure to check out our Facebook page for updates along with information and photos for each week's episodes.